jumping is the key, and that's jumping high, jumping far. I say my 4 pillars of athleticism is sprint, lift, jump high, jump far, and bounce. We're very experimental and creative in X Factor. So even though I would probably never list this, I wish we had a low rim so that we could dunk on.
Absolutely.
Like that's plyometrics.
That was Tony Holler, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Hammer Strength. Throughout the history of this podcast, many coaches and guests have talked about the value of machine-based training as the most simple, straightforward, and more ground, to take a concept from Pat Davidson, way to deliver a powerful stimulus to muscle tissues. Hammer Strength has earned its reputation over decades, not just for durability and build quality, but also for designing machines that move in tandem with natural human arcs and movement mechanics. When it comes to effective solutions in machine-based strength training, Hammer Strength delivers, and I'm excited to have them as a sponsor of this podcast. Welcome to another episode of the podcast, and thanks for tuning in. This week's guest is track coach Tony Holler, creator of the Feed the Cats speed training philosophy. Tony has over 40 years of coaching experience. He's the co-founder of the Track Football Consortium, head track coach at Plainfield North, and his Feed the Cats philosophy has influenced thousands of coaches and athletes. On today's show, Tony talks about his formative experience as a young athlete and coach, and how those experiences led him to his current philosophies in coaching. He also talks extensively on his X Factor workouts, plyometrics, wicket variations, isometrics, his inspiration from his dad's basketball, plyometric, and jump circuits, this and much more on the show. It was great having Tony back on the podcast. Let's get to episode 464 with Tony Holler. Tony, it is awesome to have you back on the show. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's great. I told my assistant coach yesterday that I was on a podcast. I'm going to be on a podcast with you, and he says, "Oh my God, you know Joel Smith?" He literally was taking one of your courses that morning for some type of credits or something in college. Nice. And so he was so impressed with your stuff, and so I feel like I'm kind of famous just being on your podcast.
Well, hey, I can say the same when I tell people, hey, I know Tony Holler. I'm coaching high school track now, so I'm like, yeah, I know Tony. So it's definitely mutual for sure. Tony, and honestly too, even just the little brief conversation we had before I pushed record, it's just so good catching up with you again. And one of the things I want to talk with you about, I mean, your career has just been so long, and one of the things that I want to get into is before your career as a coach started, what were some of the memorable, obviously you talk about like the death by conditioning type workouts, but I'm curious what your exposure to that realm of things was when you were an athlete. So what did any memorable experiences as an athlete that stood out to you? Like any killer workouts you had to do
for sure. Yeah. I think generally speaking, I think that it was World War II. Not that, I mean, I was born 14 years after the end of World War II, but all of my coaches were either veterans or had been coached by a literal World War II person. They grew up in the culture of the war. They grew up in the heroic opinion we had of our soldiers. Our soldiers did hard things, and they were taught to be disciplined and all those. And so that was really the world I grew up in, where sports winning was really important, but maybe of more importance was the turning boys into men, and that doing hard things, even if it caused us not to be as good in games, that discipline and that military stuff would is somehow the most important thing that we can teach boys. And of course, there were no girls playing sports back in my day. So it was all just turning boys into men. Nobody says turn girls into women, but that was huge. My coaches smoked cigarettes. They were, former Marines, and that was a part of the World War II culture as well. We gave soldiers free cigarettes, and they all became addicted. So those things were crazy, and I think then they latched on to general-like coaches. The general Bobby Knight, who is probably my biggest influence as a head basketball coach in the 80s. They latched on to Vince Lombardi, who literally handled himself like a general.
Yeah.
And so I think that's an interesting thing. And so obviously I was worked way beyond fatigue. It was basically like boot camp in the sports, all the sports I did. Even baseball is not a hard sport, but yet they made baseball hard for us, so that they toughen us up so we would win wars someday.
Mm-hmm.
And it was such a weird thing with me growing up in the 60s and 70s, the assassinations and the counterculture stuff, the music. My only prized possession was a stereo and an album collection. So I was getting this both sides stuff of, the World War II generation, and then like the counterculture hippie generation at the same time. Grew up with this weird mix of like Neil Young and General Patton. So that's probably why I'm kind of a weird coach.
Yeah. You had the extremes, Neil Young and General Patton. You had the extremes or the poles by which to draw from, and having that wide. I imagine it's hard to imagine that any kids in that age bracket didn't have like a hard. The coach would be like, a softie. Oh yeah, like this is, like everyone probably had that, right? But it is interesting to think if you didn't have that experience, just how that shaped your views and how we should treat young athletes today.
I think it was good for me to have literally both of those things working against each other. Interesting story. Mike Krzyzewski, he and I sat in a weight room in 1976. And a weight room in 1976 was a universal gym. And so here's Coach K and I sitting down, and Coach K was a nobody. He was like assistant coach at West Point at the time, or maybe he was the head coach at West Point, but they weren't very good. And he was a really good guy, but I kept looking at him and thinking I could not ever cut my hair like that. I mean, in the 70s we had hair, here he had this, this black choppy type of military cut and everything. And it's just weird to think that there was a day when somebody would say, no, I don't want to go to West Point because I don't want to cut my hair. But that was the weird mix that I had growing up in that age.
Yeah. With your, so outside of like, that polls of your original experience with coaches, you've coached a lot of sports too. And I think about how that must have played in, because versus, let's say you only coach track the whole time. And I think about even like physical literacy and physical education. You should do a lot of things when you're a kid athletically, and that helps you to formulate things as you eventually start to specialize. And I'm curious, and I think about this too, just because I feel like physical education is a little bit downplayed compared to what it used to be, and that little bit broader base. But tell me some of the lessons that you've learned, football, basketball, and some of those things that have resonated with you that have led you to where you are now, and making practice that fun, enjoyable piece.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because I think that, let's just say that when I got fired as a basketball coach in 1990, I was only 31 years old. And the month before I got fired, the same board that thought I couldn't coach begged me to take the track program. And I did. So here I was, 4 little kids and all that. So I had to reinvent myself as a track coach. And I hope I don't offend anybody here. But I look down on track coaches because they weren't like me. Like, track coaches need to understand that football coaches see a track coach with his clipboard and his hat and his shirt tucked in and Mr. Analytical and all that kind of stuff. And they see weakness. They see like that guy ain't like us. He's running like a recreational program out there. I'm running a football program. He could lose every race and he'll never get fired. I could go 5-4 and get fired because I lost 4 games. So I grew up in that culture. 3 of my mom's brothers were college football players, and 2 of them were Hall of Fame football coaches. So it wasn't just my dad who'd coached 47 years, but I grew up in that and that ball sport mentality. And so I was told that I coached track like a basketball coach, which I loved, but looking back, that probably means I was like stomping my foot and swearing and a narcissist, just ate up with not being able to control emotions and give that guy a technical foul and all that kind of stuff. But I saw it as a tribute to emotion and damn it, we're here to win. And I don't want the biggest track team. I want the best track team. I don't ever brag about, we have 40 throwers on my team. Well, that's dumb because you can only coach 10. Why do you keep 40 throwers? And so I just really see my ball sport background as having a positive impact on making track better. Most track coaches feel like they're a stepchild in their school's hierarchy of sports. Like it's just not as important. There's not a big crowd in the stands. Parents don't come to meet sometimes. It's kind of like you're coaching orphans because, it's just not the same as baseball, basketball, and football. And so what I tell track coaches is, well, if you want to be respected, maybe you need to develop some of those hard-nosed, we're here to win type of stuff that your head basketball coach and your head football coach will show every day of their life.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring that up. I was just thinking about this. I didn't play football in high school. And it's funny enough, high school didn't even offer it, funny enough. But I'm coaching flag football now. And it is interesting, the mentality that it's almost like it can't help but be developed in the sense, well, I mean, I'd be curious with your thoughts on this as speed-based football, but like there's a line and you're on this side and you're on this side. It's a war, basically. We're playing war. So it's very difficult to not have a certain mentality that's cultivated that comes out of that. And maybe in the way that football has so many seeds for track, it's diverse, all these different directions, explosiveness, and then you go to track and it's a lot more singular and there's a little different, it's almost different sides of the coin, maybe mentally that exists as well. It's like, I'd be curious, if you could, like, I imagine you can't coach football without some level of like, hey, we're going to war mentality. And sure. Yeah. So I'd be curious, what's your take on, I guess, I think it is interesting you brought that up though with, you could only, if you're a good track coach, you have to be like that. I almost feel like it's like different, maybe there's different even sides of yourself that can come out for coaching one sport versus the other. So curious, any thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, if people have not heard the George Carlin talk about the difference between football and baseball, baseball is played in a park. Oh, yeah. In football, we have bombs and blitzes. And,
yes, exactly. Yes. Very war. War terminology.
It's war. Yes. It's total war. And so I think even in flag football, it's like, one, you're trying to score or you're trying to humiliate the other team by keeping them from scoring. And it is a zero-sum game, where your success comes at the other team's expense. Yeah. And track is not that way. There's no defense in track. No, none. When we go to a track meet, if we have a 4x1 that is not as good as the other team's 4x1, we cannot scout them several times and I think we found a chink in their armor. I think if we really press this guy hard, no, you just have to shoot your guns. They shoot their guns, and it's not a zero-sum game, which I love. I absolutely love that. Now, a lot of football players still treat track as a zero-sum game. I've had star running backs get third place in 100 meters, take off their spikes, throw their spikes and say, I quit. I go, you got third. He goes, I lost, coach. I lost. I'm embarrassed. Okay, you're just going to run the third leg on the 4x1 from now on because you can't handle losing. But it is that difference of, I really believe that in a great track meet that you win third place. You win third place, you win fourth place. And you definitely win if you have a performance, a quantified performance, better than you've ever had before. So and I really think I love track because of that, because there's more than one winner. I do not have to humiliate another team for my team to have success.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that link between football and track too. It's like the place your mind can go, and it is. I think track is so much about the inner journey because there's things you have to learn that football itself wouldn't teach you in the way that track and field can, or even just a singular solo. I mean, it's not solo. There's a community that powers you, but it is more of a lone you and your own wiring and personality at so many times of it approach versus something that's very team. That's a great point there.
And just imagine if kids got to play football and basketball and run track like I did, and maybe even play baseball in the summer, how valuable those very different experiences are.
Yeah.
It's really cool stuff. I spoke in Ireland last summer, and I think in preparation for my talk, I listened to a couple Irish podcasts, and I heard a guy, gosh, I can't remember his name, but basically he's in charge of youth athletics in Ireland, which is really, really an important thing there. And it's pretty simple. He says that they want their Irish kids to play as many sports as possible for as long as possible.
Yes.
That's not the American. I don't think we have a mission statement in America, and that's for sure not it. I mean, football is our number one sport, and you have to retire from football at a pretty young age.
Yeah.
You don't get to play very long. And so maybe, but I love the idea that that sports are a classroom. It's educational. I don't like travel teams and 7-on-7 and AAU. These people that are not involved with education, pretending like they're just as important as the high school sports experience, because I just think it's the greatest classroom in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. That was one of my questions that leads really well into the next question I had. I was thinking about saving this for the end because I know we're going to talk about X Factor stuff and people, plyos and stuff. And I know people are chomping at the bit to get into that. But I really want to get into the next question I had, which was how your experience as a teacher, as well as your own teaching style. And I know different teachers have different teaching styles, but how that has played into how you see the classroom of sport. And with that, I'm sorry to pile on a bunch of stuff, but if you want to feed in, I guess I always look at people's teaching style. I'd be curious on people's teaching style in the classroom, how it may be different and how that ends up being an offshoot as well. So any way you want to take that, Tony, that was a mess of a question, but educational style and the classroom of sport, connecting those dots.
It's interesting. I taught early in my career, more like a World War II general. And then later in my career, I fed the cats in the classroom. I think that my coaching has always impacted my classroom more than my classroom affected my coaching. And when I say that, I'm talking about I'm a highly competitive teacher. I tell the story of my son, Troy, making a second move in 3 years. And he was going to be a sophomore at Plainfield North. And I went into the assistant principal and I said, my son will struggle with this move. He's a smart guy, but I think he's kind of scared about what's coming up. Is there any way I can get him 5 great teachers this year? And this assistant principal winked at me and she wrote down 5 teachers in 5 seconds. And I thought to myself, I want to be on that list. I want to be one of those teachers that they know is the best place for kids. And so, and I think that's a coaching thing. That's a competitive thing. And I know it's kind of obnoxious too. Like there's probably teachers out there saying it's not a competition. Education's not a competition. Well, I think being your best is a competition.
Yeah, I agree.
And so in the same way that I have to get kids to love track and field, which is not easy. Track and field is not an easy, lovable sport. Most places, it's the opposite. But I've spent the last 25 years trying to make track and field lovable because I think kids are good at what they like and they're obsessed with what they love. So if they love my sport, they're going to be better. And if they're better, we win. And I feel like a better coach and I go home with a bounce and I can't wait for the next day and all those things. So I think the same thing can happen in the classroom, that you can throw away a lot of the filler and the things we've been taught and how to toughen up kids academically. And if I can get kids, I taught chemistry. So if I can get kids to love chemistry, I could skip 3 important chapters and I've still done my job, because they're going to take AP chemistry. They're going to tell their parents, I think I'm going to look into pharmacy. Why? Oh, because I love chemistry. Well, that's really what we're after, because I think that like and love comes before excellence. I just don't know how you can have excellence without getting the like and love going. And if coaches and teachers are not conscientious about that fact, then the only kids that will fall in love with what they're doing are kids that are gifted. Like a bad track coach can have a gifted athlete.
Yeah.
A bad chemistry teacher can have a gifted student. And they're going to love what they do because they're good at it. But the true judge of a good coach or a good teacher is, can you take that kid that's not great and gifted and maybe turn them from a C student into an A student, or somebody that hates school, hates track, into somebody that loves school, loves track. And we're not doing that because we're woke or something. We're doing that because that's how we win.
Yeah.
And that's what I've found. Well, the other reason we do it is because you as a human being will be a far better, happier parent, husband, all those things, if you can go home reflecting enthusiastic kids. If you're coaching a bunch of kids that depress you, you will reflect that too. So it's up to us to create the culture, the atmosphere, climate, whatever you want to call it, where good things are going to happen.
Yeah. It's interesting. What you say reminds me of something Stephen Kotler, who's written a bunch of books on flow and mastery, has said is, I believe it was the thing that predicts if a child will stay in a sport for like 4 years or through high school is how much flow they experience in their first experience or several experiences with that activity. And which is like that embodiment, that joy, that aliveness, and that love of that thing. And so that makes perfect sense to me. And I know for me, it was very much like that. I mean, for me, sadly, and maybe not sadly, I guess it all worked out, but like sports and athletics and movement and everything to do with training was my fire that really got me through even just a lot of more mundane schoolwork and those kind of things. I just loved it. And everything else, I just kind of did what I had to do. But I think about it's interesting. I also think on the other side, I mean, I don't necessarily to frame this up as a debate or any sort of deeper, further discussion, but I think about like Cal Newport, he talks about, as a writer and talk about mastery, and he also says you become passionate about the things that you're basically repeatedly exposed to and you become good at. And I think there's an interplay of the two. I guess I think about, well, I've always loved sports, but like I look at what I do and I, be it like podcasting here or writing emails. I write an email once a week. And I would not, if you told me to write an email once a week in high school, I'd be like, whatever. Like, I think it's just because I've done it for so long and I've appreciated the growing mastery of that email writing that has become something I get in flow when I write that. But so maybe there's two poles of it. But I also think about, for sure, with what Steven said, and athletics and movement and that activity, flow is absolutely critical and we can't ignore it at all.
Yes. And I think sometimes people see Feed the Cats as only that likable part.
Sure. Yeah.
That's it. But I think what you're talking about is you can't just like track and not do anything. We are what we do.
Yeah.
And we will get more and more enthusiastic about skills that we see progress in. If you don't see progress, you can have a great climate and culture with your team, and you still are not going to like track. Like if you come in, running 19 miles an hour and you leave the season running 18.9, you're probably not going to come out next year because you have not seen what you're talking about, that progress in skills. So I think that the coach only can, be like the gardener of his program, creating fertile soil and watering and weeding and those things. But you also have to get kids to progress in the things that matter. So not only did I create a fun environment in chemistry, but we did chemistry every day. We didn't memorize words and the periodic table. No, we did chemistry. We did labs. We talked about labs and we quantified things. And those are things that are fun.
Yeah, hands-on, like the embodiment of the things. I think that's always the thing that and maybe that's where there's probably theories like non-compulsory education or different educational schools and styles. But I know that's the thing that always mattered the most to me. As soon as I remember my AP. It's funny to say even AP because I did so bad in the class. I probably should have been in regular chemistry. But it was just so much memorization of the tables, and to me, there was no reference. I don't need to make this about that at all, but like, I really struggle with that. Versus like, if it's athletics, it's here, it's now. I can feel this. It's completely tangible, and so that makes sense with things that are more alive and in the space, and things that are, yeah. So, anyways, I just think it's interesting how those two worlds cross over and complement each other. Just one last thing too is I was thinking too, and we talked about this I think on the last podcast, was like, if you take the feed the cats, you do that in high school, it could prepare you very well for the next level. Maybe your college is a little more rudimentary or a lot more rudimentary, but regardless, your start was, hey, this is stimulating, rank, record, publish, bands, fun, lots of teammates, and then maybe you could consider that next level if it's more traditional. It is, okay, well, I had that base of joy, but by this time I've done all this stuff, and you're maybe in this very prepared place, and now, hey, here's the rigor, and this is joyful because I've done this, and hopefully it's not out of control. Hopefully it's not, I'm sprinting and running, 8 400s or something like that. It's reasonable. But I think, anyway, I'm just trying to bring the two worlds together a little bit, but I know you cover that pretty well with your approach there as well in chemistry and those things.
Yeah, and I think in college track, I criticize college track coaches for their volumes and the fact that, to me, it's kind of like they throw a dozen eggs against the wall and one of them doesn't break, and they say, see, I'm successful. And there is no doubt in my mind that a kid who is 19 years old, who has had great track experiences and love it, have a far greater capacity for work than a 15-year-old who does not yet love track and has not physically been exposed to the day-to-day work that creates, that gradual increase in capacity. And so one of the worst things that's ever happened, I really offend people when I say Clyde Hart nearly ruined high school track and field, because, he's such a, people love Clyde, and I love Clyde, and he has so much success. The problem comes with if you plug in, copy and paste programs that were meant for 20-year-olds at the highest level, guys that were already thinking they're going professional or something, into a program with 14-year-old boys and girls, that's not going to end well. There's going to be injuries. There's going to be kids quit. Kids are not going to come out. And so Feed the Cats is really foundational for a college program. Having said that, I would still feed the cats the same way if I was a college coach.
Yeah. It is the Clyde Hart thing is funny, because to think about, those athletes who can handle and those eggs that don't crack, awesome. Good job. Sustaining that volume and using it to your leverage and reaching that high level. But if you take that, even if you took 2/3 of that volume and put it in for a 15-year-old, that would be, I think of myself at that age. If I didn't have high jump, if I wouldn't have had high jump as a young track athlete, as a creative and explosive and fun outlet, and it was like that, I don't know that I would have continued. It would have been rough. So
that was me.
Yeah.
I didn't have high jump, and I always thought that if I could have been a high jumper, track would have been so much fun. But no, I was that guy that was running 12 200s, and getting yelled at for not hitting some slow 29-second goal or something.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we had those days. That was later. That was almost I remember That was like my junior year. I remember it was in the peak of that. And I was just like kind of just tolerating it just so, to go do the jumps late, the next day or whatever it was. But if that was my intro and I didn't have high jump and the jumps as an outlet, it would have been rough. Well, 100%. So, hey, let's get to on the topic of jumps too. Let's use that as a great transition here. So X Factor work. I know you always you do a great job of posting the X Factor work, and the more I think about variability and athlete autonomy as well, like, hey, I saw this thing, and it's just such a great confluence of so many factors. But I've also really enjoyed the podcast you did. You may have done two with Adam Archuleta, and getting into some of the J straight, which is often very mysterious or can be very mysterious. I'd love to hear about what are the meat and potatoes of X Factor. So outside of the things where an athlete might say, hey, let's do this, I want to try this. What are meat and potatoes of that training day for you?
I would say number one is plyometrics, landing and jumping at the same time, explosiveness. Mm-hmm. But as you know, probably better than anybody in the world, there are so many variations of plyometrics. And so me not feeling like I'm smart enough to know the better variation from the other, we stay open, where we are open to doing plyometrics randomly. Now, we never burn the steak. We never do it as a conditioning thing. If my guys come in with shin splints the next day, I'm like, oh gosh, maybe we shouldn't do 3 sets of pogos. So we constantly mess with those things. But I'd say jumping is the key, and that's jumping high, jumping far. I say my four pillars of athleticism is sprint, lift, jump high, jump far, and bounce. And so that jump high, jump far, and bounce, I know plyometrics and jumping are kind of two different things, but I kind of lump them all together. It's what we do. We're very experimental and creative in X Factor. So even though I would probably never list this, I wish we had a low rim that we could dunk on. Like that's plyometrics. I go back to in basketball, my father would start practice with stations, and stations were things that we jump back and forth over a balance beam, and then we go forward back and forth. And then the next station was jump rope, and the next station was lateral slides back and forth touching the lane lines. And we do that kind of thing in X Factor, because what I have found is that basketball players seem to be the healthiest, most durable track athletes. And you say, well, why is that? Why are they so durable? And I think it's multi-directional. I think it's bouncy, jumping, those station-like things. The only difference is I think that basketball teams would kind of use that as conditioning too. They were hard. They weren't a lot of fun. We try to have a stimulus, not a heavy dose. Everything's poisonous. Nothing is poisonous. It all depends on the dose. Paracelsus said that 500 years ago. And that's the way I feel about X Factor. The other things in X Factor are strength things. Whether it's Adam Archuleta push-ups, which literally I was doing Adam Archuleta push-ups with my team in 1999. Freak of training with Adam totally influenced how I believe what we should do on days we don't sprint. I believe we should sprint 2 or 3 times a week, which is repetitive. But hey, I think we need to repeat things that are really important. But we need to do variable things on other days. And everything from that grainy video Freak of Training really affected me. And that's why we don't do tempo running. I think you can do tempo running, but I think you're leaving some other things on the table, because anytime you choose one thing, it comes at a cost. There's a little bit of zero-sum game coming there. And I found that cats don't love doing like 10 hundreds on days they don't sprint. So we do jumping, we do wickets, we do hip mobility, med balls. You could call that strength or you could call it explosive, but I think med balls are really important. As you know, when I say med balls, gosh, how many variations of those are there? You can do all kinds of things with med balls. The hip mobility stuff I think is really fun, and none of it's hard. None of it. I mean, it's like you can do. Yesterday with my team, we're going into our conference track meet today, and I showed them for the first time this year the goat drill, the infinity drill.
Yeah.
And then we're like moving a ball around our waist, doing the infinity stuff, the Caldite stuff, and counting down by twos from 100 while we're looking at the goalpost. And that can be X factor. You could even do like kind of like recovery type things where, I literally handed out spike balls yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
Where it was like a gift, a conference gift to my guys. I said, don't do anything stupid to prepare for tomorrow. Let's do some things that may improve us by 1%, like getting some feeling into our feet that wear coffins every day. We want our feet to get to feel things. And so we can do spike balls for X factor. It's just, and then of course we can go to ISOs as well. Like something else that Archuleta taught me. And so, as you know, there as well, there are hundreds of ISOs. Now, our favorites are the extreme ISO lunge that we do not do for 5 minutes. We do it for more like a minute. Maybe we're not cooking the steak long enough, but I would much rather err. This is very important. Always err on the side of less. I'm 100% sure that 90% of all injuries come from volumes. Now, I just made up those percentages, but I was an injury-prone athlete, and I believe it was because I was a long, thin, basketball-type kid that did not, hit 180. I was 140, 6'2", 140 as a sophomore. And because I was run to death in all sports, I don't think my body had the wherewithal to protect itself, which led to shoulder dislocations and ankle sprains and things like that. And what I've found is if you do less, you will have a much healthier team. But it requires a lot of patience. You almost have to say like the James Clear thing is that we want to get 1% better every day. And at the end of the year, we're going to be 37 times the person we are right now. But man, that takes patience because coaches want to get there now. Yeah. And so all those things go into the X factor. It's unscripted. It's random. We choose some things. We make up some stuff. We do some things that we weren't planning on doing. And then we go home.
Yeah. I like how you mentioned the ISOs. That's one of the things I wanted to talk about because with an X Factor day, it's interesting because people would think, okay, well, it's a plyo day, but wait, there's these static holds in there. I think sometimes that's hard for people to wrap their heads around. I've had coaches I've worked with in the past when I was a strength coach who, when they would see the ISO, they'd be like, oh, that's slow, that's static. Or like, if we were getting close to a big meet, they'd be like, hey, take all those out, because they just aren't. But again, it's like, it's a balance. We're not holding it for 5 minutes, but I was curious as how long does a cat hold a bodyweight ISO for before it's just too much? Okay, this is a little bit much. Like, and maybe even freshman up to senior, like any thoughts on your bodyweight holds and progressions there?
Well, my guys are pretty good at it because almost everything we do, like we don't jump rope, but it would be a really smart thing to do. And the way we would jump rope would be like we would go real fast until we felt some fatigue slowing us down, then we'd drop the rope. Well, the same exact thing happens in ISOs. I go, let's push yourself. Let's go for as long as we can. And I'll say, hey, I got a friend that does 5 minutes both ways, and they're like, oh, I can't believe that, coach. And so basically we go as long as we can. And when we can't hold it anymore, we stop, which is usually around a minute. It's as you know, you have to really push yourself to build up past a minute.
Yeah. A fun game I play with myself sometimes is how tired am I really while I'm doing that, in the sense of like just trying to almost categorize what is tired in my, again, like I've done this forever. So it's different for me doing this than like, a freshman coming in like, no, I'm really tired. It sucks. But I don't know. It is interesting. Yeah. Those layers. And if anything I would say I got, let's see, 41 now. I'm trying to think. I got really into like the 5 minute hold thing about age 35. And it actually whipped my ass, like doing like 5 minute holds 11 times a week. It was I mean, and I've always been someone who I'm like, yeah, I will do, if it's intense, it's actually, that is stimulating for me. But it caught up with me a little quick. And eventually I found I did get to a place where I was doing not 11 times a week, but like I was doing a 5-minute or a 4-minute lunge most days and getting a pretty good, like my squat was going up, my vertical jump was going up. But then there's this thing in my head, like, I don't know how long I can do this for. Like, I don't know how long I'll show up at the gym and be like, I don't really want to do this 5-minute lunge today. Like, and these days it's kind of like, there's a lot more, like, I just call it, like, sometimes, like when I program tempo, I do program tempo sometimes, but I call it feel good. Like I don't say, sometimes I'll put a number, but sometimes I'll just say, do this and make it feel good. And that's the goal of the given run. And so it's kind of like the same thing for the ISOs sometimes, especially myself. I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to go 3. I'll go what feels good. And usually that ends up being like a minute 40, maybe 2:10, but anything beyond that, as I start to get to that fatigue, 7, 8, 9. And yeah, so sustainability, it's,
I had the same experience.
Yeah.
I think, I was like 10 years ago, probably. It was when Rob Assisi first came up with the OG static article.
Sure.
And I think you had Rob on, and he's my go-to guy about the whole thing. And at the time, we were both talking to the same guy who was totally embedded with the whole Schroeder stuff.
Yeah.
And so we're totally into it. He was doing 5 minutes each side. I got about 3 minutes 45 seconds, and like totally cussing as I was doing it. It's miserable stuff. But
that's part of it.
I started developing some mild tendonitis, or at least soreness in my tendons, which I guess is tendonitis, that started affecting my ability to enjoy running. And we don't know, maybe it's unique to me,
sure,
or maybe it was unique to be getting older, but those things I think are important to, I'm glad I stopped, because I don't think it would have ended well.
Yeah, it is a thing where I see such value in it. For me, I see the value too in, like, all the dynamic stuff you do. It's actually a contrast because it's still, like, it's like there's this stillness, and it's a pull between that and then all the explosive dynamic stuff. And in a day and age where there's not a lot of stillness, it's like, no, this is really good. This is like, do something that's still. So it's always there. But I frame the difficulty of it, and the way it interacts with everything else has definitely changed over time. I think there is like a little fanaticism you can develop, especially too. It's like, if I'm doing it and I'm only at 2 minutes, it's like, oh, well, you got to do 5. I'm like, oh man, well, I know it's hard, but and there's something to get into it for sure. But I don't know. I've definitely changed a little bit over time. I wanted to say too, I really love, and I heard Adam talk about this on the podcast you did with him, was like the intersection between, hey, do an ISO and then do something explosive. Do an ISO, do something explosive. And that's something that a lot of, intuitively, when you're taking exercise science class, it's like, well, why should I do that? But like I think about, like, you mentioned the low rims, Tony. Like, if I basically played a low rim version of basketball with a lot of dunks and then did a few ISOs throughout that session, that would be a pretty damn good session. Like, that would be explosive and check a lot of boxes. And like you even said, with like the multi-directional, like hopping you used to do, I think there's a lot of good stuff there. So I think it makes sense that lands on an X Factor day very well. There's probably almost like a recovery element to that too. Because if you did the plyos without doing that, it makes sense you actually wouldn't recover from the plyos quite as well, versus hitting that like muscle lengthening and a little bit of that element as well. I was curious, if you've noticed anything like that, or if that impacts the way that you roll that up in there.
I just tell people I'm not really smart enough to come up with progressions and to write sets and reps. I'm just so we've just had success with being random, and I think by seeking a stimulus without going overboard. I tell people sometimes that in X Factor workouts, feel free to experiment, do different things, don't do it too long, but have something going on and off in your head. I color code our speed workouts and our X Factor workouts as yellow, which to me means caution. And that caution is, don't let today ruin tomorrow. Almost always the day after an X Factor workout is a sprint workout for us. And if I had to get rid of one or the other, I would get rid of the X Factor workout. So in a way, X Factor to me is an alternative to an off day, which frees me up to think I don't have to do too much.
Yeah.
I can do 30 minutes of stuff and go home. I could go 45 minutes as long as there's long recoveries and there's no next day hangover. So I think that as long as we're not burning the steak in X Factor, I think you can do all types of different combinations.
Yeah. I like how you have it before speed days. I think some people would think, oh, well, it's kind of like you have your speed day and then it's like an afterthought thing. But I think you could be used to really potentiate the speed day, especially for like your jumper types. Like they would probably really get fired up doing that kind of thing.
There's a lot of talk about, the certain types of jumps in particular really potentiate faster times.
Yeah. What was I had some, this was like an interesting thought that popped in my head with like, the cats. And then that day that is unscripted, I had Frank Forencich on the show, and he was talking about in nature, you never know how far you're going to run. You're being chased is like, well, I just have to get away from this predator. I have no, I'm hunting down this prey. I have no idea how far this is going to take me. But I just think about sometimes, and I've written about this, and it's constantly on my plate of creating like a what would you call it? Like a regimented yet alive stimulus. It's like, yes, on one end you need the regiment. You have your meat and potatoes. These are the sets and reps here, or the standards that we are going to hit. But on the other end, like if everything is hyper written out and there's no like kind of like flex to the system, I think that can get a little dull. And certainly there's been so many athletes who have done amazing on all written out everything. But I do think that they're just having that kind of feel of a little bit of aliveness in a session is also like a mental release from, all right, well, we got these sets and reps here. And now alternatively, there's a little bit of flex in exactly what's going on with this. And I've written to my old, it was my cross country coach, but like an example is the cross country coach at Cedarville, where my first year when I went to college, he did this thing called lottery runs with a distance group where he had them run like a 400 and flip the coin on the backstretch, and they're running. And if it's heads, they have to run another, just to have that like aliveness, just so it's not always totally scripted. I thought that was interesting, but I do think it's interesting with like feed the cats, nature. There is that element of nature where you don't know, like it's a little dynamic. Well, it's the same thing as a game, a basketball game or a football game or anything like that too. So
yes, once again, speed is repetitive. X Factor is very much flex. And it's weird as you're saying that. I thought the number one complaint that people have about X Factor is they want damn sets and reps.
Yeah.
They want progressions. What thing leads to another, all those things. And I'm like, that's just not the way I think.
Yeah, I do see you occasionally measuring like, hey, standing broad, standing triple. I mean, do those things like show up at least like regularly enough where athletes are like, oh yeah, or I'd imagine it'd be funny too, like you do like a standing triple and the athlete's like, yeah, I want to do that next week, right? Like I'm sure how does that flow through the that system?
Random, once again. Like I don't even think like, like, man, we haven't done standing triple jump in like 2 weeks. I just don't, if it pops into my head, hey, let's measure some things today. Let's, I love the standing triple. I love the triple broad jump. I love 5 bounds for, and measure it. Anything that will gamify practice. And I think, I really believe that at this point, all my track practices are gamified. My X Factor, we're measuring something. And as you know, there's technology out there now that you can measure a lot more things than we used to. We were throwing med balls the other day and because we were measuring with a chip thing on the wrist, like a guy was throwing at 6 meters per second and he ended up throwing 9. Because he was trying to beat his previous. Yeah. It's gamified, and I think it makes it fun. Every workout we do, all of our sprint further workouts that I call my 4x4 predictor and my 23-second drill is gamified. It's record, rank, and publish. Guys are performing in practice. I tell people that I don't think my guys are nervous at meets because we win and lose in practice.
Yeah.
We perform in practice. And I swear to God, not one day, for sure in football or track, did I ever perform in practice in high school. There was a little performance stuff in basketball because my dad was a really good coach. And he'd put a score on the board sometimes and say you're down 5 with 2 minutes to go.
Yeah.
Now that's gamified. That's when, you bring your best self. You perform during that 2 minutes. And, if you're not doing that in practice, I think you're just slogging along through third gear stuff, and coaches yell the word effort over and over again because the guys are not performing. All you can do is try hard, but trying hard doesn't win.
Yeah.
It's performance that wins.
There's kind of an inverse relationship between survival mode and performance mode, or it's like a dial. Where is your dial typically? Or at least could it fluctuate at the least? Like at least could it tick back into performance mode regularly? So it's interesting to think about that. That construct. I know I've definitely had some. Well, it's funny. I was just thinking back to like my own basketball. So it's funny when I was in high school basketball, I think about this is my JV basketball conditioning workouts after practice were brutal. Like they were definitely harder than varsity. Once we made varsity, it's funny actually. So yeah, I think the brutality of how hard the running was those early years, I depressed. I think it didn't allow my athletic abilities to flourish as much during the season. But my senior year, like we were running hard, like it was hard. But I remember my coach was always like, Joel Smith, you're gonna beat the point guard on this one. Like it was always beat this guy. And I was dog tired. But just that carrot of like, hey, you got to beat this guy. And at the end, he always finished with, he called it 5 for the team. It was just 5 max. Like it was a race, everyone, like with decent recovery, good enough to be like pretty good. And man, I tell you, like I remember one day after finishing those, like a bunch of, I don't know, it was like 15 minutes of that kind of thing, 20. But I mean, it was enough rest that you could be fast. Let's just put it that way. And it was always, you got to beat this guy. I mean, I but I ran up and touched 2 inches, 3 inches above the top of that little square behind the backboard at 6'1", 6.5 inches. And I mean, that was, I was elastic. That was like my medicine, but I could not have done that type of thing with the JV workouts where it was just, hey, you got a double. Hey, you got another double. And it was just do the double. It was like that stimulation and hey, you got to perform. It made it more than survival. What I'm trying to say is my JV running was very survival. My senior year was still hard, but it was always very performance driven. You had that 5 for the team at the end. That made a really big difference. And
I think it's not just physical.
Yeah.
It's
yes. Yeah.
If you burn the steak, it's also really destroying you mentally as well.
Yeah, 100%. The mental piece, I go back and I think about that because if it wasn't like, hey, Joel, you got to beat the point guard. And the coach would say too, he knew my buttons. He would always say, Joel, you're the fastest guy on the team. I wasn't the fastest guy on the team. He would just tell me that. I think he just tell me it to get me going. So, I needed to hear that and say, hey, beat our point guard who was definitely faster than me. And just trying to do that over and over again. And it was actually like random, like you said, and I don't think we didn't do it every day, but it was always a little different. And it was just beat this guy. Yeah, it made, and I'll say I am definitely someone I was a high jumper, but I was definitely like an intermediate twitch. Like I wasn't going out and running 10.6 in the 100. Like I ran like 11.5. The one time I ran the 100 was like 11.5 hand time my senior year. I might have been a little quicker than that, but like I was not cat physiology. So I had an ability to adapt to some of that work. But I figured out if I don't have competitive stimulation in the midst of that work, that's what kills me. My freshman year of college, the distance coach was the head track coach. And so we got all sorts of that kind of more tempo-y, like true tempo. Like I remember a standard workout would be like 5 400s and stuff like that. And I remember going to play pickup basketball that fall. And I remember going to try to dunk after it was over. And usually like, dude, if it was like me the previous year, freaking tomahawk, behind the back, no problem. And dude, my first takeoff, couldn't dunk it. I was like, what is going on? I was like, I'm crushing the lifts. I'm getting the weight room. I'm doing like 4 wheels on half squats and all this stuff. And I was like blown away. And what I figured out over the years is like, I actually can handle some of that. I wouldn't necessarily do 5 400s, but like I could do 5 3s, but it has to be interesting. Like there has to be something that like I could do it over hurdles. That's cool. Like there has to be something stimulating and interesting. It was Bill Boomer, that swim coach who talked about cats and dogs in the year 2000, which is for swim is like huge. I know you've done some stuff with swim too, by the way. But he was talking about that, and he said there's cats who like to solve problems. That was one of his categories. And I was like, that's me. I'm a cat who likes to, I with some aerobic trainability who likes to solve problems. So it's just, anyways, that stimulation, I'm just harping on that stimulation piece. Like that's not survival, it's performance, it's stimulating, even in the midst of stuff that could be more challenging. That was a long tirade. I apologize with the host of this show.
I mean, we're just trying to get coaches out of the idea that we win by piling on hard work. Mm-hmm. That I'm like the opposite. You do important work where there's some stimulation, some mental and physical. And when you talk about anytime that basketball coach challenged you to be competitive, he was gamifying practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was the difference. There was no gamification in the earlier, I love my JV coach. He actually taught me a lot about defense and like how to he taught me some great stuff, but it was like, I think it was good because it kind of set me up for, the next level in some ways. Probably not the conditioning piece so much, but, and I do find too, I'm sure you see this. It's almost like, I think coaches who, there's almost like a conditioning and defense type coach. You know what I'm saying? Like it's like those two for some reason. I mean, you got to play good defense, but like for some reason those two do tend to go hand in hand a little bit.
Kind of like in football, the teams that run the ball, play good defense, they're also going to crush conditioning.
Yeah,
it is just that kind of mindset. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. See how those schools blend together. You talked about Adam Archuleta, and you had him on your podcast, and I was thinking about that. He talked about his like workout for the high schoolers. It was like, all right, stations, and half the guys do the ISO push up, and then you take a break, you do clap push ups, and then go back to ISO and clap, and then it was like a RFE split squat and a jump, and so I'm curious if after those conversations, if some of those worked into your X Factor work. I'm sure some of that had certainly already been there, but in lieu of that and through those, I'm curious, well, how has that impacted you? What did you take on through those conversations, or what was a particular interest to you through that?
I think basically they confirmed, stuff that many of the things that we've been doing, like literally since the beginning of Feed the Cats. That Archuleta was a huge, we started stepping off of tall things because of Adam Archuleta and sticking landings. I call them cat jumps because that's what cats can do too. They can absorb force much better than, let's say, a dog or a pig or something. They can stick that landing and then sprint. So those things I think were huge. I am a slow learner. I'm not dumb or anything, but I really have to see things being done. And I always tell coaches that, clinics are great, podcasts are great, but there's nothing better than watching somebody that's good at what they do. To me, at least, it just totally imprints me. The first time I heard Chris Korfis speak was in 2008, and he blew me away. But the main thing was because I didn't think there was anybody out there like me that was doing a low dose thing. Now, when I actually visited him practice wise, and then started visiting him in his basement, that's where I pick stuff up. I have to see things over and over again. I was writing about RPR for about a year before I started actually doing RPR to my athletes. And that's because it just takes me so many reps of visualization and seeing it. And I'm just slow in that regard. So a lot of the stuff that Adam was talking about is like, that makes sense. but man, I need to see it. I need to go down and watch him do it. And what's interesting is here I was like starstruck with Adam. But the reason why he agreed to 2 podcasts with me is because he wants my speed stuff. That, and this is critical because his son is now in high school. And all of a sudden, when you see the steak being burnt, and you see the kid coming home limping, and like he's not going to be fast tomorrow. Is he getting faster by doing this torture? No. Well, so my speed stuff really made sense with him, and he is now coaching with the high school football team that his kid's on, and he's obviously a very competitive, smart dude, and so he wants to learn all this stuff.
Yeah, for sure. It is interesting whether you either have kids or, like for me, I hadn't been ever in the high school coaching realm. Like when I was in before I moved to Ohio, and I moved here my first year here. I was with a team briefly as a volunteer just that year, and it was like distant. The sprinters were like, it was distance, tempo, death, insanity. I mean, it was so bad. I would feel bad for my kids if they were doing something like that, or let alone or that version of a conditioning for another sport. So it's like, you really it becomes that much more real to you how much you have to polarize and really make it a very sharp turn in the other direction. Especially when your own kids, too. I mean, mine aren't in high school age yet or in that age yet, but yeah, there's some crazy stuff without question. So with some of the things that you've been putting out, Tony, too, I saw this recent video of yours, and it really intrigued me, just because I think so often all we think about in sprinting and speed is it's always like one directional. It's like stride length, just get as big strides as you can, or let's make the wickets higher, or let's let's do things bigger. You had a drill where it was a frequency based work, and I don't necessarily see that as much, or the art behind that. And so tell me a little bit about some of the different variations you use for the sprinting, be it like stride length or the frequency. And how does that fit around, like, the fly sprints or the lactate days, the accelerations? How does that play into it as well?
We do wickets as a part of our X Factor. The wickets are actually it is the only thing we do on X Factor days that you could say, well, that looks like sprinting to me. Okay, it's the only time we run in X Factor stuff is when we go over wickets. Our typical is going over 8 wickets at a spacing of 6 feet with a full run in, full speed, and we like to do different things to separate the upper body and lower body. Or we do things visually where we look left, look right, or look, not head up, but eyes up. We try to remove the habitual sprinting thing. It's odd to say that because we really want speed to be memorized. We want speed to be like driving a car, and that's why we do it a lot. But we also want to create chaotic situations too for a different stimulus. And so that's our normal wickets. So what you saw was, instead of a 20-yard run-in, we had a 5-yard run-in, and we did it on turf from the end zone. Yeah. It just changes it up, makes it kind of like different, and we timed it. Like if you want to change things, you time stuff. If you want to see your kid clean their room better than it's ever been cleaned, they clean your room, I'm going to time you. And they will go crazy, because even chores, when they're gamified, are more fun than just doing work. So we had a 5-yard run in. We started the end zone. Our first wicket was at the 5-yard line. We did spacing of 5 feet instead of 6. It doesn't seem like much, but it creates, I call them choppy wickets. And the frequency is higher. The verticality of the shin going into the ground is more vertical. Because we're timing it encourages that frequency. Some guys have trouble knocking them all down because their mind just is still memorized the old way. Yeah. And that's good. We want the mind to learn a different stimulus. Now, does that make our 4x1 run faster? I have no idea. It just passes the eye test for me. Now, the opposite of that would be 7-foot wickets. Now, with that, you have to have the big run in. And number 2 is you have to wear spikes.
Yeah.
Because we're not going to go over 7-foot wickets by reaching. We go over 7-foot wickets by sprinting faster. So it's interesting that we have the 6-foot wickets for our generic. We have the 5 for high frequency choppy. And then we have the long for stride length and without reaching. And I think that all 3 of those things really work on backside mechanics. The other thing that you can do besides timing that gamifies is to have 2 sets and race.
Yeah.
Does the same thing. And somebody out there is probably thinking, gee, could you put a free lap cone in between those 2 things? And so we're competing. We are timing. Oh, and by the way, if you want to change the way kids do stuff, video or fake video, what you're doing, they think they're going to be on Twitter that night. And so everything just rises to a level that would not happen if you did not video, if you did not time, and you did not compete. So those are just things. And that was random that day. I made that when I went to practice. I said, I don't want to go through a full X Factor thing. I really want to do handoffs today. Let's have everybody do this. And then my 4x1s will stay and do handoffs after that. That's what we did.
So that specific one, is that still on the X Factor day then? That the high frequency? Okay, so it all, oh cool. Yeah, the thing that I really like about that, and I've noticed this more and more in the past years, is I think oftentimes we're like, okay, well, what's the perfect? And you could get, this is probably mostly what happens with like pros. It's like, okay, you take this many steps and they're this long. You get the calculator out basically, and it's like a very precise thing. But I had a really good podcast with Bren Vresrolu. I'm sorry, Bren, if I mispronounced your last name, but he's really into like motor learning and ecological dynamics. And he had this study is so awesome. It was teaching the shot put. It's a Wolfgang Schulhorn teaching shot put to like 13 or 14-year-olds. And it was like on one end, you just teach them the shot put traditionally, do it like this, hold your hand here, everything drills like, very rote. And on the other end, here's 200 plus variations of shot put, throw them all. And the variation version killed the rote version, the rote learning, group. I think I put the study on one of my Instagram posts and the percentages, but it was by a very wide margin that this group threw better. And I think about sometimes with some of these like special strength things for sprinting, like a wicket, we can almost get so. And I've seen the tables, and I think they're cool. I think they're amazing. Like that, this is your trochanter length. I mean, Tony Wells freaking crushed it as a high school. I mean, that guy, he killed it. So I mean, that's awesome with all the like the precision. But I do think on the other end of things, if you treat it as just differential learning, like, hey, learn to sprint with long strides, learn to sprint with short, fast strides, and you're rounding out all the abilities. Then the next day, just go do it and then let your instincts like put it together. I think there's something very, very powerful to that.
I think you're 100% correct. One of the cool things when you're timing, and I say that our speed days are repetitive. We do basically the same speed drills, and people say, "Oh, speed drills don't make you faster." Well, that gives me a chance to coach though during those speed drills, and I think our kids warm up during our speed drills so that they don't get hurt sprinting. So, and then we do RPR too, as embedded in our speed drills. So, but when they're actually getting timed, there's not many things you can try. You know what I mean? Like, like, hey, I want to run my fastest time ever today. Just think about that. I mean, like, you can take bigger steps, smaller steps. You can like change your posture. You can be bigger in the arms. Usain Bolt, I think, said one time, knees up, shoulders down. As you know, a lot of kids, when they try too hard, their shoulders come up. But there's really not a lot. And I think people are kind of dissatisfied with me when they show me running mechanics. And I'm like, yeah, that looks pretty good. they're like, oh, wait, I thought you were this speed guy that's going to like tweak this and tweak that. And the differences in running, there are certain things, as you know it. I mean, if a kid's got his head back and,
Right.
like looking at the clouds or something, okay, we can fix that. But overall, kids just really need to do it and experiment. And by doing a couple speed days a week forever, kids will experiment. And that's why Michael Boyle, even though he doesn't have much of a sprint background, after I visited Boston 7 or 8 years ago, he's incorporated time sprints into everything they did. And he said, I didn't coach it, and they got faster.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I'm kind of, talking myself out of a job here, but if you'll just time sprints, kids will try things and they will go with a longer stride or shorter stride or longer or bigger arms if that works.
Yeah.
And the timing will be the proof.
Yeah. There's a book I still reading it partially. I read most of it. It's called Unconstrained by a Canadian martial artist called Kevin. His name's Kevin Secures, and he has this like in a page. It's like the dial of representation. He probably calls it something that's less motor learning, like less jargony. But like in martial arts, that dial would be if there's no representation, it's like you just like punching the air like that, and if it's all the way representative, you're fighting somebody. But I think of that in sprinting too, because sometimes we think we're like, this is the optimal situation where someone does a sprint and we tell them something. But that's not actually maximally representative, because now you're running with something in your head to intellectually focus on. That might be like a 6 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10. 10 out of 10 is you're just racing for the time and you're internally figuring it out. And I think that's where, it's like all the instructions have to like emerge from, it's in the body. It's not the intellect trying to divide these. I mean, how many coaches, yourself included, right, have had a situation where a kid ran sling in a fly and you tell them something and then, oh yeah, well, I didn't think to put my arm like that. And then they do it and they run like a 10th faster. That never happens, ever. Not even like
the opposite happens.
Yes, exactly.
You can tell them something that will run slower.
Yeah, exactly. And so, just letting the constraints do that for you, I think is like, that's your assistant coach right there. And each athlete is your own assistant coach, and I'm, the guide,
Facilitator.
Facilitator.
Gardener.
Yeah, the gardener, exactly. Have you ever done anything where you mixed, like in a single session, like a high frequency and a longer? I've done a little bit of that in the past year and I've enjoyed it. I was curious if you ever done any like contrasting like that.
Yes, I have, but it's not often, because another thing that has to go through my filter is the filter of efficiency.
With a bunch of kids.
Like I got 35 kids.
Yeah.
And let's just say that what Chris Corfus does in his basement, I can't do with my 35 kids. And there are things I do for efficiency, to keep me sane, to keep practice short, that maybe is not optimal. But that's okay. I think one of the things that pisses coaches off is sometimes I'll say practice is overrated. And they're like, oh, there's a lightning bolt. Like, are you kidding me? Like, we're coaches, practice is everything. And what I have found over and over again is that 3 days off sometimes produces better results than 3 days of practice. So I think that if you say practice is overrated, we're not saying practice is unnecessary or we should not practice. But I think when you say practice is overrated, it frees you up to try things, and you don't feel like chained to the things that the process. Every coach says the process is everything. Embrace and I'm like the only coach in America that says screw the process. We are results. We're aiming towards results, even in practice. Obviously, practice is process, so I'm not like really anti-process. But I think if you have to say trust the process a lot, then your process is probably, half filler, and you're trying to convince kids, just trust what we always done,
Yeah.
And yeah.
I think that's just it. It's like you mentioned, the practice is a process, but if you have to say it all the time, it's like, there's something that's defensive about it inherently if you have to constantly. It's like the last podcast we did, Tony, you said something. I actually had this as a quote. I think it's like the guy who's always trying too hard to get a girlfriend never gets a girlfriend. It's kind of like the same thing. Like if you always have to say intent, that's one of the things that gets me too. If you're always saying intent, well, it's like, well, do you just have a really boring practice that athletes don't feel like they want to naturally try? Like there's a lot of things you can do to make this more interesting and meaningful for athletes to give it their best. And I think you could say that for a lot of pieces of that coaching equation.
I've never had to ask for effort.
Yeah.
Not one time. Because when you're timing and stuff, when you're competing, effort is there. It's like, isn't effort the most important thing, coach? I'm like, it's always there, so it's not the most important thing. I mean, we're always at high effort levels because we're never burning the stake and we're competing and all those kinds of things. I sometimes say that the two biggest enemies of speed is trying too hard and thinking too much. And I think there's some life lessons out there with those things too. Like that, and that goes to the idea of like, if you try too hard with some girl that thinks they like you or something, you're just going to run her off. You better stay cool and hold on loosely and not let go or something like that, because trying too hard just never works out very well, or thinking too much.
Yeah, it's like I think about the sprint drills. Like you mentioned the sprint drills, and I think a very big peeve of a lot of coaches is, my athletes are really lackadaisical on speed drills. And you look what's written, and it's like, all right, 2 by 20 meters of this, that, and the other thing. And that could be great. I mean, but if you have athletes who are like lazy, air quotes through it, well, what if you just do 5 meters and say, get as many hits as you can? And all of a sudden, you don't have to say, have more intent. It's just, what does that mean? Like, if I'm an athlete, well, what does that mean? Like there's different ways to show what meaning exists behind things. I think you just have to look at how things are framed up before just going to intent, to check the parameters first. And then then maybe we can go into some of the stuff a little bit more.
And coaches just have to be persuasive. I've gone from a young coach that said, we're going to outwork everybody in the country. And we might have, embarrassingly, to a coach saying every team in the country is going to outwork us. And my kids look at each other like, is this guy crazy? I mean, like, isn't work what takes us to the promised land? I said, well, it will, but it's really the quality of our work. So when we're doing 10 speed drills, that's 5 seconds apiece. That's 50 seconds of work. So what does that work have to look like? Yeah. And so I think that I convinced my guys that it'd be stupid to go through the motions when you're only doing 50 seconds of work and then you're going to do 3 short sprints.
Yeah. It's a great mental exercise too, to think of like, just to be like, all right, hey, you only have these like 3 things today to get as good as you can. Or like, what if I told an athlete, hey, you're going to do like 1 20-meter high knee run and 1 sprint today, and that's it. What will that 20-meter high knee run look like? If like you want to get faster or something, and like, okay, how you just did that should be how they all should look like, basically, like that kind of thing, but
that might be the greatest practice ever.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely, it's interesting. Yeah. As we reframe, what draws and like you talked about essentialism and, how essentialism frames things up. So, last question for you here, Tony. And this is one that it might be a little different, but you post the distance program at PN Track relatively frequently. And I'm just curious what they're, relative to the distance training, and they're obviously very successful. Like you've posted like in meets of these guys are killing it, like a bunch of guys under 2 minutes and 800. What does that program tend to look like mileage wise? Like what is stimulating in it for those guys in terms of, I know this isn't a distance running show, but just from a general principles perspective, I'm curious where Feed the Cats lands with the distance group, and how that resonates throughout the program.
Well, you're right. We have really a lot of talent. I think next year we will have the best senior class in the history of Illinois. We've been runners up in cross country the last 2 years. We have milers run 4:15, 4:15, and 4:17. 2 of them are underclassmen. 9 of our 10 top kids are all underclassmen. And Andy Dirks has just done an amazing job. And I watched Andy come in as a true distance coach. You know, when I say true distance coach, we run miles, we log miles. We embrace the life of the lonely distance runner and blah, blah, blah. And I watched him grow and change, where now, I remember one time he actually told his cross country team something like, "Hey, we're the guys that don't get the cheerleaders, to date and things like that. We're the cross country team. We have to, blah, blah, blah." Now our guys, they get the cheerleaders. My guys don't look like what I see as like cross country guys. My guys look like a basketball team. My distance guys. They lift weights. They throw med balls. They over and under hurdles. They time fly 40s, and they treat the time 40s like it's not only gamified, but it's like really, these are not strides. These are like free lap timed 40s. They have taken workouts. Andy, when he first came to me like 12 years ago or something, he was under the mindset of all other distance coaches that we perform in meets. We don't perform in practice. Practice is practice. Like we have to wait to perform, and we shouldn't perform more than once every 2 weeks or something like that. And now they actually quantify several workouts, which I think is brilliant, because what that does is it creates intent, without even talking about it. But it also shows progress, that he can take a junior that runs a workout in whatever, we'll just say he, 3 times 800, he averaged 208. And he can say, okay, as a freshman, you did this same workout and you're 232. How's that make you feel? God, I mean, everybody should get chills, like, oh God. And then the first thing you think about, where am I going to be next year, coach? And that inertia, that straight line, you can't show that without data. And I think that it's weird that distance coaches, like kids wear watches, they record stuff, all that, but they just never perform in practice. And they're not, a lot of distance kids aren't real competitive. I mean, they're pacers, they're runners. My kids are cutthroat competitors. When I say my kids, I'm not their direct distance coach, but I'm proud of them. And, the idea that just accumulation of mileage is the key is just, in my opinion, wrong. And so obviously you don't feed the cats in cross country by doing 10 speed drills and 3 short sprints. But that can be a part of it. That could be your warm up, and I think a lot of cross country teams are starting to do that. And, you better, as Steve Magnus would say, you better run a lot. Nobody's questioning that. But I think that we can talk about quality of runs, and we can talk about differentiating the workouts for first year kids compared to kids that are going to take you to the promised land, the state track meet or something. That you don't want kids slogging through sloppy miles when they're 15. Compress it a little bit. Let's try to get a little more quality into their work, but still let's show them progress.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, because I agree. It's very easy once you get caught up in just straight mileage, you lose that competitive, that competitive animal, and just to still be able to bring that out for distance runners, I think it's just massive. So, Tony, I know you have a conference track meet here today. I actually do as well. So we high school track season is in full effect, but that's all the questions I have for you today. And it was great catching up with you again. It's awesome just hearing your ideas, how your career has unfolded too. I'm glad we could go into that today and all the way back to your time as an athlete. So thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it.
Best podcast in America. You do a great job, Joel.
Thank you.